Well, joining me live from Melbourne is Shadow Finance Minister Jane Hume. Thank you for your time, Jane Hume. Let me start by asking, after the inflation figures out last week, which showed quarterly underlying inflation had risen 0.5% in a quarter, or a 2% annual increase, and quarterly inflation had risen just 0.2% in the quarter, has the government achieved a soft landing, and should there be a rate cut?
Andrew, it's too little too late for many Australians who have seen their standard of living go backwards by 8.7% in the 3 years of this Labor government. Cumulatively, prices have risen by over 11% in that time, food by over 12%, rents by 17%, housing by 14%, electricity and gas by over 30%. So you can understand why Australians are feeling it in their hip pocket. Inflation is only part of the problem, but it is causing so much pain to ordinary Australians. The number of Australians out there that are on financial hardship programs, for instance, for their electricity bills has gone up by 66% under this government. Their mortgages have gone up. An average mortgage now requires an extra $50,000 a year. That's not the kind of money that you find down the back of the couch. And the number of Australians that have had to take on a second or even a third job has increased by 130,000. So under this government, standards of living have collapsed and Australians are feeling the pain. Moreover, Deloitte Access Economics is saying that they expect that standards of living won't be restored to pre-pandemic levels until 2030. So this is cold comfort for Australians that have been feeling the pinch, that have had to wind back their own expectations, make tough decisions around their kitchen tables about their budget because the government has failed to do the hard yards with its budget.
Have they failed to do the hard yards, though? Because the US had this problem, the UK had this problem, Canada had this problem, New Zealand had this problem. Unemployment here is lower. We haven't gone into recession. It is terrible for people out there, there's no question about that, but it has been the case in all developed nations, hasn't it? I mean, haven't they actually achieved the soft landing here?
And in all developed nations, interest rates have come back faster and sooner.
They were higher.
Which we haven't seen here in Australia. And unemployment is higher today than it was when the coalition left government. Moreover, economic growth in this country is a stagnant 0.8% over the last 12 months. And we've been in a per capita recession for 7 quarters in a row. If it wasn't for the incredibly high migration figures, over 1 million people in just 2 years, well, we would be in a recession.
So what should they have done?
I don't think there's anything for the government to crow about.
No, that's for sure. But what should they have done? Should they have spent less? Is that the bottom line here?
Well, certainly the government spent an additional $347 billion that the coalition would not have committed to and didn't commit to at the 2022 election. In fact, in the 2025-26 year, government spending as a proportion of the economy is going to be higher than any time on record outside of the pandemic.
But Jane Hume, if they spent less...
the Reserve Bank Governor...
Yeah, go on.
Yes, go on. Go ahead, Andrew. No, well, Michelle Bullock, the Reserve Bank Governor, has said that government spending, that growth of the public sector, has been one of the reasons why it's taken so long to get inflation under control. That, in fact, it's making the situation worse, making the Reserve Bank's decision to lower rates that much harder. And that will certainly be one of the factors that Michelle Bullock and the Reserve Bank Board have to consider when they make their rate cut decisions.
All right, let me ask about the shadow cabinet reshuffle. So Peter Dutton's put Jacinta Price in charge of government efficiency, James Stephens in charge of waste reduction. If you were to become Finance Minister, you shadow finance, isn't that your job, government efficiency, to find things to cut?
Well, Well, this is not unusual for a coalition government to be focused on reducing government waste and improving government efficiency. We've had ministers for government efficiency and reducing red tape and improving government services in the past. It's fantastic to have Jacinta Price as part of the team. She is a warrior for the cause, having already identified so much waste and mismanagement in her own portfolio. It'll be fantastic to have her as part of this
So
team.
it's not
and
undercutting
don't for a second
you?
think that there isn't... Oh gosh, no, of course not. And don't think for a second that there isn't an awful lot of government waste to go around. We can start by talking about the 36,000 additional public servants that have been appointed by this government. That's about 40 new public servants every single day since they have come to government. And at the same time, we've actually seen a reduction in the quality of services that are being delivered. So just for example, the Department of Health has increased by 47%. I was talking to Anne Ruston about this just yesterday. And yet at the same time, bulk billing rates have gone backwards. The Department of Energy and Environment has doubled in the number of public servants, and yet approval times, environmental approvals, are slower and emissions have gone up. Services Australia have added an additional 4,000 public servants, yet it takes longer now to apply for a pension, around 48 days compared to 35 under a coalition government. If you're on the phone to the children and parenting services, wait times up to about an hour. It takes 5 times longer to get a low-income card than it did under the coalition. So of these 36,000 new public servants, you're not getting 20% more. That's a 20% increase of public service. You're certainly not getting a 20% improvement
All right, I'll get to that in a
your
second.
public service. What are they doing?
I just want to get to this point. Will Jacinta Price be on the Shadow Cabinet Expenditure Review Committee?
Well, Jacinta Price is already in Shadow Cabinet, where the important
on the
decisions are making.
Expenditure
And in
Review
fact,
Committee?
elevating the role, well, that's a decision for Peter Dutton. But Jacinta Price is already in Cabinet, and it's fantastic to have that government efficiency focus within Cabinet as well.
All right, on the
I'm
weekend,
really looking forward to having Jacinta on board with this.
Yeah, to the Australian, Jacinta Price said the coalition would follow the principles of Margaret Thatcher in office. What did you make of those comments?
Well, I think it wouldn't be hard to find a number of Margaret Thatcher fans in a coalition government. But the real issue here is to put a uniquely Australian approach to what it is we're going to do to improve government efficiencies. And there are certainly ways that we can do that very quickly. Just for instance, the government waste that has been identified by James Stephens on the underlabor.com website, and if you want to spit out your Wheaties over your breakfast, go to the underlabor.com website that James Stephens has put together, is eye-watering. Let's just take one example. DFAT, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, have employed a consultant in Darlinghurst to give them strategic advice on how to have a First Nations approach to foreign affairs. Now, I'm not entirely sure why that's necessary in the first place, but it's going to cost over $250,000. On top of that, we already have a First Nations ambassador and part of his mandate is to develop a strategic approach to a First Nations approach to foreign affairs. He earns $380,000 a year. There is extraordinary amounts of duplication for things that I'm not entirely sure we need in the first place. So there is plenty to do here. I want all hands on deck.
Can I drill down a bit on this? 36,000 public servants. Will you be getting rid of all of them?
Yeah.
Will you get rid of 1,000 new ones in the NDIS? Will you get rid of the additions in Veterans Affairs, or are you going to keep those in those two departments?
We've certainly said that we're going to stop the growth in this bloated public service.
Are you going to cut any of the 36,000?
We will make sure that essential services are maintained and indeed improved. But there is duplication out there inevitably, we will make sure that we stop the waste and we stop the duplication. Because as the public sector grows, it grows to unprecedented levels, it actually prevents the private sector getting on and getting ahead. We want to make sure that we have a private sector-led recovery, because that's the only way to sustainable economic growth. You will not find an economic recovery through an increase in the size of the public sector.
Yeah, indeed. And I accept there is a point around private and public and the economy. Do you plan, though, to bring consultants back in, which controversially the other government did? Will we have, you know, the PwCs of the world back in the picture under a coalition
government? Well, ironically, this government is still using consultants, and there will always be a place for consultants, whether it is, because you can't expect public servants to be experts at everything all the time, particularly when technology is changing so much. This government may have, talked a big game on consultants, but they're still using them. And the best example I can give you is that DFAT one, that they've employed a consultant in Darlinghurst to give them a strategy on a First Nations approach to foreign affairs. If they were really cutting consultants, they wouldn't have done that.